My sister lied that I'd quit med school and my parents cut me off. Years later, she landed in the ER, where I walked in as her attending physician. When the security guard handed me my attending physician badge on my first day at Presbyterian Memorial, I remember thinking the laminated plastic felt heavier than it should. My photo stared back at me, Dr. Miranda Chen, emergency medicine, and I wondered if my parents would even recognize the woman in that picture. It had been 6 years since they'd seen my face. 6 years since my sister Natalie convinced them I was a fraud, a liar, a medical school dropout spiraling into oblivion. I didn't know that in 48 hours, Natalie would be wheeled through my trauma bay doors, her life hanging by a thread thinner than the lies she'd woven. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The night everything collapsed started unremarkably. I was hunched over a cadaver in the anatomy lab at Georgetown Medical, my back screaming from 12 straight hours of dissection practice. It was 11:47 p.m. I remember because I'd been checking my phone obsessively, waiting for my mom to call me back about Thanksgiving plans. My hands smelled like formaldehyde despite 3 rounds of scrubbing, and my eyes burned with the particular exhaustion that comes from memorizing the branching pathways of the brachial plexus while running on 4 hours of sleep. My phone buzzed. Not my mom, my dad. The text was clinical, almost formal. Your mother and I need space to process your deception. Until you're ready to be honest about your situation, please don't contact us. We love you, but we can't enable your destructive behavior anymore. I read it 3 times, my pulse hammering in my temples like a second heartbeat. Deception? Destructive behavior? I was literally elbow deep in a cadaver's thoracic cavity, studying to save lives. What the hell was he talking about? I called immediately, straight to voicemail. I called my mom, same. I texted my younger brother Jason, what is dad talking about? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, Nat told them everything. I'm sorry, Mir. They're pretty devastated. My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the edge of the stainless steel dissection table. Everything? What everything? I hadn't done anything except exist in a state of perpetual exhaustion and crippling student debt. I tried calling Jason. Blocked. I tried my Aunt Susan, my cousin Beth, even my childhood neighbor Mrs. Kowalski, who'd known me since I was 7 and helped me build my first science fair volcano. Every single one. Blocked, ignored, or offering vague, uncomfortable condolences like I died. By 3 a.m., I was sitting on the floor of the anatomy lab, my back against the cold tile wall, finally understanding what had happened. Natalie, my golden child sister, the marketing executive with the perfect apartment and the seemingly perfect life, had apparently decided that having a doctor in the family was competition she couldn't tolerate. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that lab until the fluorescent lights flickered on at 6 Monarch a.m. and the morning students started filtering in. I looked, I'm sure, like something that should have been on the dissection table rather than beside it. Chapter 1: The Architecture of a Lie. To understand how thoroughly Natalie dismantled my life, you need to understand her superpower. She didn't just lie, she performed concern. She weaponized worry. What I pieced together later through the fragments Jason reluctantly shared and one guilt-ridden confession from my aunt was this. Natalie had gone to our parents 3 months earlier with tears streaming down her face and a story that hit every one of their deepest fears about me. She told them I'd dropped out of medical school after my first year, that I'd been lying about my attendance for over 18 months, that I was drowning in debt from a failed attempt to keep up appearances, that I was too ashamed and too proud to admit failure, so I was begging her to keep my secret. She said I was fragile, that I'd threatened to hurt myself if she told them, that she was terrified for my mental health but couldn't keep carrying the burden of my lies anymore. She showed them screenshots of texts she'd fabricated. She showed them a bank statement she claimed was mine, showing a negative balance and overdraft fees. She told them about a concerned call she'd received from a classmate who'd confirmed I hadn't been seen on campus in months. My parents, bless their terrified hearts, believed every word. Within a week, the financial support stopped. The $1,500 monthly stipend they'd been providing, money that covered my rent and kept me from having to work full-time during my clinical rotations, vanished like smoke. My health insurance, which had been through my dad's company family plan, was terminated. I received a terse email from my mother saying they couldn't in good conscience continue enabling my avoidance of reality. I was in the middle of my trauma surgery rotation when the rent bounced. I was 36 hours into a shift, had just helped repair a ruptured spleen, and came home to an eviction notice taped to my apartment door. I called my parents 57 times over the next 2 weeks. Not one call was answered. I sent emails with attachments, my official Georgetown medical enrollment verification, my clinical rotation schedule signed by Dr. Patricia Vance, chief of surgery, my transcript showing a 3.87 GPA, my student ID, photos of me in my white coat at the hospital. Nothing. My mom finally responded once, briefly. Natalie warned us you might do this. She said you've been creating fake documents to hide your shame. Please get help, Miranda. We'll be here when you're ready to face the truth. That's when I understood the true genius of Natalie's lie. She hadn't just told them I'd failed. She'd inoculated them against my proof of success. Every piece of evidence I provided became, in their minds, further proof of my desperate derangement. I was fighting a ghost version of myself, and that ghost was always one step ahead. I stopped calling after that. There's a specific kind of death that happens when you realize your own parents would rather believe you're a liar than admit they might be wrong. It's not dramatic. You don't scream. You just feel something inside your chest go very, very cold and then quiet. I packed what fit in my 2009 Honda Civic. Everything else, my grandmother's china, my childhood books, my framed college college diploma, I left in that apartment. The landlord could have it all. Material possessions felt obscene when I couldn't even afford groceries. Chapter 2. The Education of Exile. The first night in my car was in October. I parked in the hospital employee lot, figuring security wouldn't bother me if they saw my Georgetown medical badge hanging from the rearview mirror. I'd stuffed a pillow and a sleeping bag in the back seat, along with a duffel bag of clothes and my laptop. The temperature dropped to 38 degrees. I could see my breath. I cried for exactly 14 minutes. I timed it, then stopped because I had to be on the floor at 6 a.m. and puffy eyes would invite questions I couldn't answer. I learned to survive in increments. I showered at the hospital gym before my shifts. I ate whatever was left in the physician's lounge after conferences: cold pizza, stale bagels, the occasional abandoned sandwich. I studied in the medical library until they kicked me out at midnight, then slept in my car until 5 a.m. when I'd sneak back into the hospital to shower and change. I picked up extra shifts in the university health clinic, drawing blood and running basic labs for $18 an hour. Every dollar went into my tuition fund because Georgetown Medical, while offering generous financial aid, still required nearly $15,000 per semester in fees and supplies that weren't covered by loans. I sold plasma twice a week. I learned which grocery stores threw out their almost expired food at which times. I learned to ignore the hunger. The worst part wasn't the physical hardship. The worst part was the holidays. Thanksgiving came, and I spent it alone in the hospital cafeteria, eating a dry turkey sandwich while my classmates posted Instagram photos of their families, tables crowded with aunts and uncles and grandparents and siblings, everyone toasting and laughing. Christmas was worse. The hospital was eerily quiet, and I sat in my car watching families stream past with shopping bags and wrapped presents, and I felt like I was watching a life I'd been exiled from, like I was a ghost pressed against the glass, unable to make them hear me scream that I was still here. I called once on Christmas Eve. My mom answered accidentally, probably thinking I was a spam call. I heard her voice. Hello? And I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What was I going to say? Please believe I exist? She hung up after 3 seconds of silence. I learned to weaponize the abandonment. Every time I wanted to quit, and there were dozens of times I fantasized about just walking away from medicine entirely. I thought about the story Natalie had told. In her version, I was weak. I was a quitter. I was someone who crumbled under pressure, so I refused to crumble. I finished my rotations. I scored in the 94th percentile on my Step 2 boards. I matched into a competitive emergency medicine residency at Presbyterian Memorial. I did it all while sleeping in my car, eating ramen, and carrying the weight of my family's rejection like a stone in my chest. When I walked across the stage at graduation, they called my name, Dr. Miranda Chen, and the applause was polite and brief. Every other graduate had a section of the auditorium erupt in cheers. My section was silent except for a few classmates clapping. I saw the dean glance into the crowd, expecting to see my family. I saw the confusion cross her face when she realized no one was there. I smiled for the photographer anyway. I held my diploma. I didn't let them see me break. Chapter 3. The life after death residency was its own kind of hell, but at least it came with a paycheck. $58,000 a year sounds like a fortune until you're working 85-hour weeks and realize you're making about $13 an hour. But it was enough to rent a studio apartment, a real apartment, with walls and heat and a bathroom that wasn't shared with 20 people. It was enough to eat real food. It was enough to stop feeling like I was drowning. I threw myself into emergency medicine with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I learned to intubate in my sleep. I learned to read EKGs like poetry. I learned the exact amount of lidocaine needed to numb a wound and the precise angle to approach a central line. I became the resident you wanted on your trauma team. Calm, fast, unflinching. Fear didn't live in me anymore. Fear required vulnerability, and I'd burned all my vulnerabilities 6 years ago in the parking lot of my old apartment. I met James in my 3rd year. He was a pediatric nurse in our hospital, and he noticed me one night when I was sitting alone in the break room at 2 odd a.m., eating vending machine chips and staring at the wall. He sat down without asking and told me about the 8-year-old he'd helped place a PICC line on, and how the kid had asked him if he'd ever met Spider-Man because he seemed like someone who would know superheroes. James had this way of talking that made you forget you were tired. He made me laugh. Actual, real laughter that felt like a muscle I'd forgotten how to use. He didn't ask about my family for months. When he finally did, I told him the truth. They think I'm a failure. They've thought that for years. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "Well, they're idiots then, because you're the most competent person I've ever met, and I've worked with a lot of doctors." We got married 18 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse. It was just us, 2 of my closest friends from residency, Dr. Sarah Kim and Dr. Amir Patel, and James's parents, who welcomed me with the kind of warmth I'd forgotten existed. I wore a simple white dress I'd found at a consignment shop. James wore his best suit. We exchanged vows in front of a judge who seemed genuinely moved, and afterward we went to a tiny Italian restaurant and ate pasta and drank wine and laughed until our faces hurt. I didn't send my parents an invitation. I didn't even tell them it was happening, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't imagine it. I imagined my dad walking me down the aisle, imagined my mom crying happy tears, imagined Natalie as my maid of honor, imagined what it would feel like to have a family there to witness the best day of my life. Then I remembered that they thought I was a dropout who'd fabricated an entire medical career, and the fantasy crumbled like ash. James held me that night when I cried, the first time I'd really cried in years. He didn't didn't tell me it would be okay. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held me and let me grieve the family I'd lost, and somehow that was enough. Chapter 4. The Night the Past arrived. 6 years after the exile began, I was an attending physician in the emergency department at Presbyterian Memorial. I had my own office, a cramped windowless room filled with medical journals and a desk buried under paperwork, but it was mine. I had a reputation as someone you wanted running your trauma bay. I had residents who respected me, nurses who trusted my judgment, and a marriage that felt like the one solid thing in my life. I thought I'd made peace with the past. I thought I'd built a life that didn't need my family's validation. Then, on a Tuesday night in November, my phone rang at 11:43 p.m. I was at home, curled on the couch with James, half watching a documentary about ocean life. The call came from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers at midnight are usually telemarketers or wrong numbers, but something made me pick up. Hello? The voice on the other end was frantic, pitched high with terror. Miranda? Miranda, is this you? It took me a second to place it. 6 years of silence had made my mother's voice feel foreign. Mom? Oh, thank God, thank God. She was crying, the words tumbling out in a breathless rush. It's Natalie. She's at Presbyterian Memorial. They said her heart. Miranda, they said she might not make it. My entire body went cold. Not the cold of shock, but the cold of a switch flipping. The physician took over, pushing everything else into a locked box. What happened? She collapsed at work. They said something about her heart valve. They're doing tests now, but they said she needs surgery. They said, I'm on my way. I hung up before she could say anything else. James was already grabbing my coat. Go, he said. I'll meet you there. I drove to the hospital in a fugue state, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind spinning through differential diagnoses. Cardiac valve emergency, 28 years old, sudden onset, acute mitral regurgitation, endocarditis, ruptured chordae. I didn't let myself think about the fact that I was about to see my family for the first time in 6 years. I didn't let myself think about Natalie lying in a hospital bed, terrified. I didn't let myself think about anything except the medicine. I parked in the physician lot, badged into the ER entrance, and walked through the double doors. Chapter 5. The Reunion. The charge nurse, Carmen Rodriguez, spotted me immediately. Dr. Chen, you're not on schedule tonight. I know. My sister was brought in. Natalie Chen, cardiac emergency. Carmen's eyes widened slightly. She'd worked with me for 3 years, and I'd never mentioned having a sister, but she recovered quickly. Trauma 3, Dr. Okoye is the attending. Dr. Benjamin Okoye was one of the best cardiologists in the state, a Nigerian immigrant who'd trained at Johns Hopkins and had hands steadier than a Swiss watchmaker's. If Natalie had him, she had a fighting chance. I headed toward Trauma 3, my hospital badge swinging against my chest. I could hear the controlled chaos before I rounded the corner. Monitors beeping, someone calling for more IV access, the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. I pushed through the door. The first thing I saw was Natalie, small and pale on the gurney, an endotracheal tube snaking from her mouth, her chest rising and falling in mechanically controlled breaths. Her skin had that grayish-blue tinge that means the body is struggling to oxygenate. Monitors surrounded her like electronic sentries, displaying numbers that told a story of a heart that was failing. The second thing I saw was my parents. They were pressed against the far wall, trying to stay out of the medical team's way. My father looked like he'd aged 20 years, his hair completely silver now, deep lines carved around his mouth and eyes. My mother was clutching his arm, her face a mask of terror. She was watching the medical team work with the helpless desperation of someone who has no power and no understanding, who can only watch and pray. Then Dr. Okoye stepped aside to adjust an IV line, and my mother's gaze traveled across the room and landed on me. I watched it happen in stages. First, recognition, her daughter, the one she hadn't spoken to in 6 years, standing in the doorway. Second, confusion, what are you doing here? Third, comprehension as her eyes dropped to the badge clipped to my scrubs, to the white coat draped over my arm, to the stethoscope around my neck. Dr. Miranda Chen, attending physician, emergency medicine. Her face went through a series of rapid changes. Shock, disbelief, dawning horror. Her hand flew to her mouth. She made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. My father followed her gaze. I watched his face do the same gymnastics of realization. His eyes locked on my badge, and I saw the exact moment it clicked. The daughter they thought was a dropout, the one they'd cut off and abandoned, was standing in the trauma bay wearing the coat and credentials of an attending physician at one of the state's top hospitals. Dr. Okoye noticed me then. Miranda, I didn't know you were on call. I'm not. She's my sister. The room went very, very quiet. Dr. Okoye recovered first, his professionalism snapping back into place. She's got acute mitral regurgitation, likely from ruptured chordae tendineae. We're prepping for emergency valve repair. She's stable for now, but it's critical. I nodded, my physician brain cataloging the information. Ruptured chordae. The strings holding the mitral valve in place had snapped, probably from some underlying weakness or infection. The valve was leaking, blood flowing backward into her lungs instead of forward to her body. Without surgery, she'd go into full heart failure within hours. What's her ejection fraction? I asked. 35% and dropping. Bad. Not dying immediately bad, but circling the drain bad. My mother found her voice. Miranda. It came out as a broken whisper, my name sounding foreign after 6 years of silence. You're a doctor? I looked at her, really looked at her. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. The confident woman who'd raised me had been replaced by someone who looked haunted. I've been a doctor for 3 years, I said quietly. quietly. I've been in medicine for 10. My father made a sound like he'd been punched. But Natalie said, I know what Natalie said. My voice was flat, clinical. We can discuss that later. Right now, your daughter needs surgery. Chapter 6. The Vigil. Dr. Okoye took Natalie to the OR. The surgery would take between 4 and 6 hours. They had to stop her heart, put her on bypass, open the valve, repair or replace the damaged chordae, and then restart everything. It was delicate, high-stakes work, and even with someone as skilled as Okoye, there were no guarantees. My parents followed me to the cardiac surgery waiting room like stunned children. We sat in the blue plastic chairs under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by other families in their own private hells, and for several minutes, no one spoke. Then my mother broke. I don't understand. How is this possible? Natalie showed us. She had proof. She had fabricated evidence, I said, my voice still that flat physician tone. Screenshots she'd doctored, fake bank statements, a story designed to hit every fear you had about me. But why? My father looked genuinely lost. Why would she do that? I'd had 6 years to think about this question. Because she couldn't stand that I was succeeding at something she couldn't do. Because having a doctor in the family shifted the spotlight. Because she's always needed to be the special one. And my career threatened that. We tried to call you, my mother said, her voice thick with tears. We tried to help you to. No, you didn't. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just stating facts. You blocked me. You ignored every piece of proof I sent you. You chose to believe I was fabricating transcripts and forging documents rather than consider that Natalie might be lying. She was so convincing. She's always been convincing. That's her gift. I looked at them both. But you want to know the worst part? You never asked me directly. Not once. You never said, Miranda, tell us your side. You just decided I was lying. And that was that. My father's face crumbled. I'm so sorry. God, Miranda, Don't. I held up a hand. Don't apologize because you're scared and guilty. Don't apologize because the truth finally forced its way into a room where it couldn't be ignored. You had 6 years to apologize. You had 6 years to question the story. You didn't. We thought we were helping you, my mother whispered. We thought tough love would make you face. I was facing things. I was facing 85-hour work weeks while sleeping in my car. I was facing clinical rotations while selling plasma to afford textbooks. I was facing board exams while eating vending machine food because I couldn't afford groceries. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. I graduated med school with honors. I matched into a competitive residency. I became an attending physician. I did all of that while you thought I was a failure. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, my mother said, let us make it right, please. We'll do anything. I don't know if you can make this right, I said honestly. I've spent 6 years building a life that doesn't include you. I got married without you there. I achieved every milestone I dreamed about as a kid, and you weren't there to see any of it. You can't give me those years back. You're married? My father looked stricken. For 2 years. His name is James. He's a pediatric nurse. I felt my voice soften slightly, the physician armor cracking just a bit. He's the best person I know. You would have liked him if you'd been there. My mother dissolved into sobs. My father just sat there, his face gray, staring at nothing. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. 4 hours into the surgery, Natalie's phone, which my mother had been holding, buzzed with a text. My mom glanced at it, frowned, then handed it to me wordlessly. The message was from someone named Mark. Hey, did you tell them yet? I know you're scared, but they deserve to know the truth. I looked at my mother. Who's Mark? Her boyfriend. They've been together for a year. I opened Natalie's phone. The passcode was still her birthday, same as it had been when we were kids, and scrolled through the messages. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. 3 months ago, a text chain between Natalie and Mark. Natalie, I think I'm going to tell them about Miranda. I can't keep lying. Mark, about time. That's been eating you alive. Natalie, I know. I was so jealous, Mark. She was becoming a doctor and I was barely holding together my marketing job and I wanted to hurt her. I wanted to be the special one for once. Mark. And now, Natalie, now I lie awake at night thinking about her sleeping in her car, about her graduating alone, about her wedding without any family there. Mark, I destroyed her life because I was petty and jealous and I don't know how to fix it. Mark, start by telling the truth. Natalie, I'm terrified they'll hate me. Mark, they might, but they'll definitely hate you if they find out some other way. I read through more messages. Natalie planning and replanning how to confess. Natalie writing and deleting draft apologies to me. Natalie 3 weeks ago, typing out a long message to our parents explaining everything, then deleting it and saying, I can't do this. I handed the phone to my parents without a word. I watched them read. Watched my mother's face go from confusion to horror to a grief so profound it looked like physical pain. Watched my father age another 10 years in 30 seconds. She knew, my mother whispered. She's known for months that she ruined your life and she couldn't, she was scared, I said. Fear makes people do terrible things, including staying silent when they should speak. My father looked up at me with eyes that were swimming. How are you not screaming at us right now? How are you so calm? Because I learned a long time ago that screaming doesn't change anything, I said. And because I'm a physician, I don't get to fall apart when lives are on the line. Even when it's your sister's life, my mother asked. Especially then. I met her eyes. I took an oath. First, do no harm. That oath doesn't have exceptions for people who've hurt me. If it did, I wouldn't be much of a doctor. Chapter 8. The Surgery. Dr. Okoye emerged at 4:47 a.m., still in his surgical scrubs, his mask pulled down around his neck. He looked tired but satisfied. She made it through, he said. We replaced the damaged chordae and repaired the valve. She'll need close monitoring for the next 48 hours, but barring complications, she should make a full recovery. My mother collapsed into my father's arms, sobbing with relief. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not quite, but something close to it. Maybe relief that I wouldn't have to carry the weight of Natalie's death on top of everything else. Can we see her? My father asked. She'll be in the cardiac ICU within the hour. Family can visit briefly, but she'll be heavily sedated for at least another 6 hours. After Dr. Okoye left, my parents turned to me with identical expressions, hope mixed with fear, mixed with desperate longing. Will you come with us? My mother asked. To see her? I thought about it. Thought about Natalie lying in that hospital bed, tubes and wires keeping her alive. Thought about the last 6 years, the hunger, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the missed milestones. Thought about the text messages on her phone, the confession she'd been too afraid to make. No, I said quietly. Not yet. I need time. Time for what? My father asked. To figure out if I want to forgive you, if I can forgive you, if forgiveness is even the right word for what needs to happen here. I stood up, my knees protesting after hours of sitting. You made a choice 6 years ago to believe a lie that fit your fears better than the truth that challenged them. I can't unknow that about you. I can't unfeel what it was like to be abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But we do love you, my mother said desperately. We never stopped. Love isn't passive, I interrupted. Love is showing up. Love is believing someone when they tell you who they are. Love is picking up the phone when your daughter calls 57 times begging you to listen. You didn't do any of those things. So what do we do now? My father asked, his voice breaking. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, maybe something in between. But it has to be on my terms now, not yours. I'm not the desperate 25-year-old sleeping in her car anymore. I'm not the one who needs you. You're the ones who need to prove you deserve a place in my life. I picked up my coat and headed toward the door. Miranda, my mother called. I turned back. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. Thank you for saving her. Even after everything, thank you. I nodded once. Then I left. Epilogue. 6 months later, Natalie recovered fully. She sent me a letter 3 weeks after the surgery. A real handwritten letter, 12 pages long, apologizing for everything, explaining her jealousy, her insecurity, her cowardice. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just told the truth, finally, and said she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again. I didn't respond for 2 months. Then I sent her a short message. I don't know if we can ever be sisters again, but I'm glad you're alive. She wrote back immediately. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. My parents have been trying. They sent invitations to Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. They sent cards on my birthday. They asked tentatively if they could meet James. I said no to most of it. I went to one Sunday dinner, sat at their table, ate my mother's pot roast, and left after an hour. It felt surreal and uncomfortable and sad, but I went. That's something. James thinks I should give them a real chance. He says everyone deserves grace, that people make mistakes, that families are complicated. He's probably right. He usually is. But I'm not ready yet. Maybe I never will be. What I do know is this. I don't need their validation anymore. I'm Dr. Miranda Chen, attending physician in emergency medicine, wife to an incredible man, survivor of an exile that should have destroyed me but only made me stronger. I built a life from nothing when they thought I was nothing. I became someone they couldn't imagine while they imagined I'd become no one. That's its own kind of justice. The other night, I was closing out a shift when a young medical student approached me in the hallway. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed, her white coat wrinkled. Dr. Chen, she said hesitantly, can I ask you something? Sure. How do you do it? How do you stay strong when everything feels impossible? When you feel like you're drowning and no one sees you struggling? I looked at her for a long moment. I saw myself at 25, lost, alone, terrified, determined. You do the next thing, I said, and then the thing after that. And eventually, you look up and realize you've survived. And surviving is its own kind of victory. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Thank you. Hey, I said as she turned to leave, you're going to make it. I promise. She smiled. And in that smile, I saw hope. I walked out to the parking lot as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My car, a newer model now, one with actual heat and working windows, was parked in the physician lot. I had a home to go to, a husband who loved me, a career I'd earned through blood and tears and sheer stubborn will. I thought about that girl sleeping in her car 6 years ago, the one who thought she'd lost everything. I wish I could tell her that she'd be okay, that she'd be more than okay, that the people who abandoned her would one day stand in a trauma bay and realize exactly what they'd thrown away. But I don't need to tell her. She already knew. That's why she survived. I drove home, the morning light streaming through the windshield, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not forgiveness, not quite yet, but peace. And for now, that was enough.